Good afternoon and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. We're live streaming from the Boathouse at Confluence Park today, and we also have our first live audience in a while, so welcome to the room. I'm Steve Marks, Chair of the CMC Board of Trustees and President of Hannah News Service here in Columbus, and I want to thank you for tuning in today and thank you for showing up to the room. Metro Club live streaming is presented by the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch, PNC, and NBC4i. Thank you all. We'd also like to thank those of you who purchased a virtual seat for today's forum. We are very grateful for your support. Largely because of you, we are able to continue our live streaming. You can learn more about CMC, register for events, join or renew your membership, purchase a virtual seat, or make a donation anytime at columbusmetroclub.org. This afternoon, please look for an email from staff at columbusmetroclub.org. This is an important member survey. Please take a few moments and fill it out and help us grow the Metropolitan Club. Central Ohio has been one of the fastest growing regions in the country for decades. We enjoy abundant supplies of fresh water and natural gas, a strong workforce, an extensive logistics network, and plenty of land for development. Consider now a pandemic, climate change, and cost of living. Might people and businesses in more densely populated, expensive, and climate vulnerable coastal cities be on the move? What do the trends tell us, and how do trends in transportation prepare us and businesses for the future? We'll explore these issues and more in our new series, Trends That Will Shape Us, with a focus today on transportation. Please welcome Director of the Ohio Department of Transportation, Dr. Jack Marchbanks, Professor of Geography and Director of the Center for Urban and Regional Analysis at The Ohio State University, Dr. Harvey Miller. Managing Director of Logistics, Distribution, and Supply Chain at Jobs Ohio, Kevin Chambers. And our host, editor at Columbus Business First and CMC board member, Doug Buchanan. Doug, the stage is yours.
All right, thank you very much. All right, thank you all. I think we should just jump right into this because I have a feeling we're going to run out of time. There's a lot of topics to cover. But first off, why don't we just do some introductions, and if you don't mind, just let us know maybe in a very broad view one of the major trends that you see in transportation and logistics coming up here. And Jack, we'll start with you.
Well, thank you. I see V2X as being what the internet was to the consumption of information and entertainment in the transportation field.
Okay. Harvey?
What do I think is changing, you're asking?
Yeah.
I think COVID's going to have a major impact, of course, on our cities, although I think the impact is not going to be as strong as we think it is. I think that cities are sticky. They tend to persist. Cities have experienced things like the COVID pandemic repeatedly in history. Cities have been around about 5,000 years. We've had a major global pandemic, or at least pandemics like this, about every century, and cities are still around. So I think cities are going to change, there's no doubt about it, and I think the changes are going to be complex, but I think that a lot of the transportation challenges that we were facing prior to COVID are still our transportation challenges today.
Right. Kevin?
Thank you. But regardless of the pandemic, in the next 20 years, we look to see an increase in truck traffic over the road by 67%, and an increase in rail traffic by 28%. So we have to look to a region like Columbus and say, how do we fit into making that successful? And how does that impact the increased need that's being driven by e-commerce and other trends in retail versus online sales? So a lot of challenges in front of us.
Yeah, I do want to talk about that last point specifically in a little bit, but Jack, let's go back to you. I understand you have some material that you wanted to share about what ODOT's planning here for the next few years.
Well, thank you. Yes, one thing that we do at the Ohio Department of Transportation is plan and look forward. For those of you who are not aware, we just recently released Access Ohio 2045. You can access it online at access.ohio.gov. It gives you our 45-year look ahead, and it will cover some things I'll probably miss in talking to you today. But My role as director of the Ohio Department of Transportation comes in three parts. I am a steward, I am a sentry, and I'm a scout. Steward in taking care of the system. We're unveiling a $1.92 billion construction program taking care of what we have. That's stewardship. Sentry, looking out for dangers ahead, safety. Those pinch points in regards to this looming explosion of logistics. You think we have a lot of trucks in Central Ohio now? We're going to have a lot more in the next 20 years. But the final thing that I do as a director is serve as a scout, looking forward. And one thing that I did when I first came into my position at the Ohio Department of Transportation is go out and talk to almost 5,000 employees and tell them that, listen, you're in an industry where there's a paradigm shift underway. You know, the old transportation system of the 60s and 70s, 80s and 90s is going away. And I liken this particular era right now that we're in to the 90s. When I first came to the Ohio Department of Transportation in August of 1991, a week after I started my job, they launched the World Wide Web. I went in and told my boss, Michael Coleman Flynn, I said, Mike, I think the world has changed. and it had. And what you have here is something that you can see in the entertainment business, how we used to consume music. That shows you what was going on. You look at, it was basically technology that you had some type of device on which you played a piece of product that would give you music. And then when you move forward to the next slide, you know, change is a fundamental change in how the world, as we know it operates. So, you know, cassette, 45, CD, put it in some type of player and you get music. But a paradigm shift is what we saw with Mr. Jobs, where the internet being that platform, as I said, vehicle to everything, the platform for a paradigm shift. What's happening here, if we can go ahead, is that we're merging all these things. You used to have to go to the library to do research. You had these giant floor consoles for music, which were furniture as much as they were anything else. And you had to go into a movie theater to see a movie. But with a paradigm shift made possible by the internet, you can do it all on one instrument, streaming. And what we're in the middle of right now is that we have these technologies that are swirling about, whether they're EV, hydrogen cell batteries, you know, all this smart technology. Columbus, of course, a smart city, but it hasn't settled yet. So we're looking at how this will coalesce into a paradigm shift that will make the future of transportation really something that we haven't seen. And we want to be there. We want to look ahead. I love the Pizzuti thing, the people who can see the future, you know, they are the ones who will survive and prosper in it. So we're looking at the future here, and we're looking at technology being the driving force in transportation for future generations.
Okay. So, Dr. Miller, this idea of we need to have Dr. Miller, we need to have a different paradigm. I mean, that is something that you are actually advocating for.
Very much so. Our current transportation paradigm simply is not working. Right now, what we have here in Columbus and Central Ohio is a transportation monoculture that's dominated by automobiles. Okay. And monocultures are not healthy. They're not sustainable. Automobiles are the most energy inefficient and space inefficient way to move people. It's also a big social barrier. Automobiles require ownership. It's expensive, and many people in our community can't afford it or don't have the ability to operate automobiles. And it's also a very brittle system. It's not resilient, and we see that every day. Every day you listen to traffic reports and you hear one crash, one bad, some bad weather, a rainstorm, and the system freezes up. It basically fails us every single day. So I totally agree with what Jack's saying about a paradigm shift. We need it badly. I want to say, though, that, and I am very encouraged by the application of things such as information technology, artificial intelligence, and autonomous vehicles. I think that is partly the future of our mobility systems. But we have to remember that mobility is not just about bits, it's about atoms. We're actually moving physical things, freight and people, through a built environment. And so while I'm in favor of all these new wave technologies that are impacting mobility, we also have to make the hard changes in our infrastructure. We need to make space for active transportation, walking, biking, micromobility. We need to make space for public transit, dedicated bus lanes and rail, and we need to shift our resources away from facilitating driving as the predominant thing we're doing here in Central Ohio and the state of Ohio more generally, and rebalance our transportation systems so that they're an integrated, multimodal, seamless systems with multiple choices and a much more sustainable and resilient outcome. So I'm glad to hear that, but I want to remind everyone that we have to make some of these hard changes, these
Right.
physical changes in our infrastructure and environment to make this happen.
Okay. Kevin, you're primarily concerned with logistics and perhaps maybe in a bit of opposition. You do want to make it easier and quicker for trucks primarily.
Well, I agree completely with Dr. Miller that the transportation infrastructure is key, right? And I think that what Dr. Marchbanks has laid out in the Access Ohio 2045 plan directly addresses some of those infrastructure concerns. I mentioned a few minutes ago about the expected significant increase in over-the-road freight and even rail freight. And I will tell you that where we are geographically, sitting in the Columbus metropolitan area, it is a sweet spot for the movement of goods and services, whether it be the highway system north, south, east, west, or the significant rail assets we have. Ohio is number 3 in the country when it comes to active rail lines. We are number 4 in the country when it comes to active highway miles per lane. So it's a great spot for businesses to look for distribution, fulfillment centers, e-commerce centers as well, and that's simply going to help us when it comes to manufacturing and all other aspects of business. So I think we're all focused on the future infrastructure of our transportation systems, and I believe that's where our focus should be.
Okay. Jack, back to you then. The focus in the plan goes beyond roads, highways.
Definitely. ODOT has embraced active transportation for years, and as our demographics change, we're looking at communities being self-sustaining. We're looking at, in every project we do as stewards, integrating as much capability for citizens to have the availability of active transportation as possible. But we do have the competing issue that Kevin talked about, and that is the fact that we're a logistics center. We are that sweet spot. Sometimes to know what's coming, you have to look beyond your state, you have to look beyond your region, you have to look beyond your nation. In 2001, Norfolk Southern was smart enough to realize the opening of the Panama Canal, widening it with the simultaneous deepening of the ports in Virginia will create a tsunami of freight that will be coming through the eastern half of the United States. Luckily, Central Ohio was on top of it with Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, the Ohio Department of Transportation, the City of Columbus, and Norfolk Southern, and CSX, and we cleared double stacks for the Heartland Corridor. That is why we are so vibrant when it comes to rail. We need to look forward again. So what is in our region, our area, that's going to impact Ohio, and particularly when it comes to logistics? It's the Gordie Howe Bridge in that state up north. The Gordie Howe International Bridge will supercharge the I-75 freight corridor, which will have impacts on 70 and the Turnpike. So we have to look ahead to these developments if we are going to stay on top of this and create that environment that the doctor said that is conducive and protects those things that create quality of life, that create equity, that you don't need a car to go get a COVID-19 shot. This is what we're looking for.
Go ahead.
Well, I think you're spot on, and as we've seen over the past few months, we've seen a significant backlog in freight container cargo at our east and west coast ports. And although 70% of freight is going to move by truck, getting those goods from the ports into the state of Ohio, using the Heartland Corridor, which provides direct double stack access, puts us again in a great location. We have in the state of Ohio 12 intermodal facilities, 4 of which are in the Columbus metropolitan area. So this is a location that we can get goods and services quickly from overseas, use our foreign trade zones if necessary, and help businesses move their goods both in and out in a very easy and a very a faster way than to use the East and West Coast ports, if possible. So, great location. I think this marriage of different modes of freight really comes together nicely here.
Okay. I'm going to ask you all the same question. We're talking now about trying to pass a federal infrastructure bill with lots of money to be had. What would you like to see Ohio, or how would you like to see Ohio use that money? Jack, you want to start it?
Well, I think we need to utilize the infrastructure dollars that come Ohio's way, in an egalitarian fashion that not only benefits cities and our overall, interstate system, even though I'm the guy in charge of the interstates. Right. We need to make sure that Appalachia is not left behind. We need to make sure that poor communities, whether urban or rural, are not left behind. So I like the focus toward, equity. And, what is equity? That's a kind of loaded question. I think it's what's fair for people. But I'd like to see us, of course, address our legacy system. As the doctor said, we want to update this legacy system where we create connections where we had created scars before in the construction of the original interstate system.
Right. But the Society of American Engineers every year comes out with and they're always saying that the bridges are crumbling and.
Our bridges are not crumbling in Ohio. Now we have some at-risk bridges in some of the cities, and that's because of this whole issue of infrastructure funding. Mm-hmm. But we want to see these dollars spent to improve our infrastructure. We want to keep our entire system in a state of good repair. We partner with the local governments all the time. Mm-hmm. And we share our funding beyond what we have to do by federal formula. So it's about all of Ohio having their infrastructure improved in this next transportation bill, this next infrastructure bill as proposed by President Biden.
Okay. Harvey, how about you?
I don't disagree with anything I just heard. I think that's a good vision. I think that we need to think about transportation infrastructure more broadly. And I think part of what has to happen is that we have to reimagine some of our transportation infrastructure. I totally agree with what Jack was saying, that we have to correct some of the wrongs that happened when the interstate highway system was built. They wiped out neighborhoods here in Columbus and divided communities. We do have that infrastructure now, and we have to deal with it. And a lot of our highway infrastructure, for example, is at the end of its 50-year time span, and it needs to be rebuilt or rehabilitated. Yeah. I think as we rehabilitate it, we need to rehabilitate it with the vision of thinking multimodal. Creating, for example, dedicated bus lanes. That's something that Columbus is looking at right now, and that's something I'm very much in favor of. Rail transportation within cities is ideal. It's the most energy efficient form of transportation from basic physics because of the friction, of steel wheels on steel tracks. It just makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, rail takes a long time to build in this country, and it could be decades. And we don't have that much time. We're losing the race with the climate crisis. We have to start seeing shifts away from automobiles and from single occupancy automobiles towards other modes of transportation, and I think we can get there pretty quickly here in Columbus by dedicating some of our road space and highway space to public transit by creating dedicated bus lanes and bus rapid transit. Mm-hmm. There's an initiative going on right now in Columbus called Linkus, and it's one of the things that makes me very hopeful. I think that they've identified 5 corridors in Columbus spreading out from the center city, and they're going to look at all 5 of those corridors, in a very community-driven way, and figure out what is the best transportation solution there. So they're not like buying into one technology and just putting a one-size-fits-all solution. They're going to look at these 5 corridors which follow the natural transportation growth routes historically in Columbus, and they're going to look at what is the best combination of transportation and land use for those corridors. And I think that's a really good initiative. It's going to require, for us to do this though, it's going to require more resources for these things, and it's also going to require making space for public transit on our roads and highways. Mm-hmm.
Kevin, what would you like to see some of this money go towards?
I agree with the broad look at improving the infrastructure. But from a freight, from a jobs, from an industry perspective, Anytime we drive down the highway, we see an incredible amount of vehicles parked on the side of the road because they have no place to go. We see the need for continuing to bring that traffic through the state of Ohio. And let's face it, Ohio is growing. The Columbus region is, last time I checked, #1 in the Midwest, and I think #1 west of the Mississippi as a millennial destination. This is a place people want to come. And so we need to look at how can we help the population grow from an infrastructure perspective. We need to enable housing. We need to enable people to get where they need to go to work, to live, to shop, and do that easily and feel good about it, and that's only going to help us grow more. So I think that everything that these gentlemen have said is spot on, and we need to figure out the best way to get through the next 10, 20 years as this growth happens, both from a population perspective and from a business perspective.
I believe, Harvey, you brought up the environmental question, and there's no doubt that this is a global crisis. But I mean, and perhaps Kevin, you can answer this as well. But Columbus seems to be relatively calm. I mean, is that a selling point, or is that a point for us to market going forward? You want to take it, Kevin?
Would you say calm?
Calm, yeah.
Well, I think that it's calm because we as a state, as a region, have done a very good job of trying to stay ahead of the trends and trying to stay ahead of the growth, whether that be site development, whether it be infrastructure, highway, rail development. We have not necessarily been faced with a series of difficulties
Right.
that would cause us to be in a disruptive state.
Yeah.
So I think it's a credit to what we've done in the state and the region, various agencies, that we have been able to remain calm despite growth and despite what's happening right now in the world.
Yeah.
By calm, you were referring to climate disruption,
yeah,
extreme weather, I think.
Yeah.
And we have had disruptions here in Columbus in the past. Google Franklinton 1913. That was a major altering event in this city, and a lot of cities in Northwest Ohio, and that type of flooding from extreme storms is not only going to happen in the future, it's more likely in the future with climate change. So that's one stress that we're facing is flooding. The other thing we're facing is heat stress. We're going to get hotter, and that's going to have impact on infrastructure and on people. Most of our engineering tolerances for building infrastructure were built on the past climate record, which now doesn't exist anymore. We're going to get hotter, and we're going to start to see infrastructure failing because the design specifications are for a climate future that are not for a climate future that's happening. It's already happened in Washington, D.C. in 2012. There was a flight at a national airport that had to take passengers off because they couldn't taxi out of the gateway because it was so, during a heat wave, the tarmac was so soft that they couldn't tow the plane out with the passengers on. That same weekend in Washington, D.C., there was a metro car derailment because of a heat kink in the rail. Okay. That's the kind of stuff we're going to start seeing in the future here, and we're going to have to try to rework our infrastructure to accommodate that. And then with people as well. We want people to walk, bike, and use public transit, but they're going to be exposed to higher and higher heat stress in the summer. So I think as we think about infrastructure, we should also be thinking about green infrastructure as well, putting in tree canopies and vegetation to cool the ambient temperature in our city so that people can move outside of a car and not be harmed.
I would agree with everything he just said. We have to put more greenscape in our infrastructure. And as he was pointing out, 2012 was a tremendously hot year. We had pavement melting here and asphalt and other pavement stresses. So as we move forward, we have to look at how do we change our material specifications, how do we build infrastructure that will deal with the greater heat and the greater probability of flooding. We're outside of our most flood-prone area in Ohio, which is southeast Ohio, the Appalachian region. I just was speaking with a county engineer because just the rain so far this year, Brett Booth of Gallia County, he has 300 slips in his one county so far this year. And so luckily we haven't had the rain we've had in past years, but we see the impact on roadways with the greater more intense storms. And Ohio, I was just in Clark County and Montgomery County. Ohio experienced tornadoes in May in 2019. So we are looking at, while the calm is deceptive. We do have environmental stresses, impacting us here in Central Ohio. But I have to, be a rah-rah person like Kevin. This still is a relatively great place to live compared to the coasts and who are really facing, and the Southeast that are really facing environmental stresses.
But again, that's a marketable opportunity, right?
Yeah, and I misunderstood
Yeah,
your question about calm, but
Yeah.
clearly, studies do show that Ohio is a very safe place to live when it comes to environmental factors that hit our coasts, that hit the, East Coast, West Coast, the southern part of the country. We just saw what happened in Texas.
Yeah.
And yes, we're going to get a tornado from time to time. We're going to have some flooding from time to time. But in relative comparison to our neighbors and to the rest of the country, this is a very environmentally safe place to live when it comes to natural disasters and other related issues.
Yeah, okay. This is a trend series, so I wanted to talk specifically about the pandemic and the impacts from the pandemic. What do you see, in relation to your fields of expertise, some of the trends that have maybe have always been there, but they've really accelerated during the pandemic, and that will change how we operate and how we should operate going forward? Kevin, you want to start with that one?
Well, as mentioned earlier, we've seen a significant acceleration in over-the-road traffic. We remember that from, a year ago, last March, April, May, when we're struggling to keep critical supplies moving and into the stores and so on. So that's going to continue. One of the other trends that is remarkable that we've seen is, what's the new normal going to be when it comes to people working from home? So we've seen an exodus from some of the major cities, people who, really feel very tight where they are, and Ohio has been able to take advantage of that by bringing population into the state that really could work from anywhere successfully. And the third one I would bring up would be a very strong increase in e-commerce and fulfillment centers and things like that. And the Columbus metropolitan area was way ahead of the curve on that, and that brings taxes to the local areas when these retail sales are made out of the warehouses, fulfillment centers here in the region, and it brings a lot of goodness and a lot of jobs into this area. So those would be the three things that come top of mind for me.
Okay, great. Harvey, you want to take it?
As I said in my opening remarks, I don't think the pandemic is going to fundamentally change cities. I think cities will still be around. They're just too compelling. One of the things about cities is that as they grow in size, the benefits outweigh the costs in terms of the innovation, economic productivity. It increases at a superlinear rate as opposed to infrastructure costs, which is at a sublinear rate.
Yeah.
And that gap grows as cities get bigger. And that's one of the reasons why cities have been so compelling for 5,000 years and why they keep growing, just because of that productivity that they generate. I would agree that there's opportunities for Central Ohio, especially since over the long run, we are in a very relatively climate resilient region, and we could exploit that. So I don't think cities are going to change because they're just too sticky. They stick around in history. I think we will see some changes, like from work from home. I don't think that we're going to see, well, it's going to be complicated. We're not going to see a wholesale abandonment of offices. I don't think that's true. I think it's going to depend upon the business and the industry and how much face-to-face interactions and the kind of creativity that comes out from happy collisions among people at work.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be determined on an industry and by a firm basis as to who retains working at home and who brings people back to the office. I do think downtowns are an interesting question because, downtowns as we know them right now as a single-purpose concentration of offices and headquarters and related business services, that's a relatively new thing in urban history. That only happened in the 19th century when we invented railroads and telegraphs and telephones,
Okay.
and also, elevators and that allowed these steel frame construction. So these single-purpose downtowns, like the one we're looking at here, out this window, is unusual, and we may go back to more mixed-use, multi-purpose downtowns in the future with less of a concentration of a single activity, which
Right.
I think ultimately could be good for downtowns. They could become more 24/7 centers. The big issue we have to deal with, of course, is all the infrastructure that's geared towards one single purpose. but we can reuse infrastructure. You know, a year ago, the last night I went out in downtown Columbus before the whole pandemic thing hit, I was having cocktails in what used to be a bank in downtown
Right.
Columbus.
Right.
I don't think the people who opened that bank thought people would be having cocktails in there, you know, like 70 years later. There's
Right.
also a toilet factory in Franklinton, 400 Rich Street. I can't imagine that people who built that toilet factory would think that it would be a destination wedding, you know, event and a bar, and, you know, so we can reuse our infrastructure. We just have to be, and we can reuse all this built environment that we've built and infrastructure. We just have to be creative about it.
Okay. And Jack, how about the pandemic?
Well, the pandemic has accelerated the whole question of how do you pay for infrastructure. Obviously, the gas tax was of declining utility in terms of a revenue source. So what are we going to use in the future? Will it be vehicle miles traveled? Will it be some type of road user charge that you pay annually or monthly? That is what the pandemic has done in regards to the field I operate in, and that is transportation infrastructure and funding these projects that we need to have move forward.
Yeah, I mean, several car makers have said they're, you know, certainly phasing out electric cars, if not, or gas cars, and they're not going to eliminate gas cars completely. I mean, what happens at that point? I mean, we have to change the formula well before that.
Definitely. As I mentioned at the outset, we're in a transition right now. We're in that paradigm shift where we don't know where it's all going to settle. But one thing is for certain, that the gas tax is going to be like, you know, the buggy with the, you know, Surrey on top. It's not going to be around 20 years from now in terms of a viable source.
Yeah.
So big decisions have to be made by the top-level leadership and our legislators as to how we're going to fund transportation going forward.
Kevin, I can't imagine that the logistics companies are going to go for miles traveled as a, you know, as a funding source, but I mean, the money has to come from somewhere.
Well, it does, and I think that it's too early to tell exactly where those trends are going to take us, and it's great to have someone at the helm of ODOT who's got that kind of vision.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay, I'm going to move to questions in just a couple of minutes from our in-person audience and from our live stream. So if you have a question, you can line up at the mic over there. But let me ask you one more question. The technology, we are a smart city. There were a lot of experiments, a lot of things done. What tangible change are we seeing, or should we be seeing, from everything that went on with Smart City? Jack.
Well, Smart City, one of the biggest takeaways is that Columbus is now EV friendly. I think you're going to see adoption of EV at a far higher rate in the greater Columbus area than you will see elsewhere. There's only 1% of the market that's electric hybrid compared to 13% in California, but I do think that's going to increase rapidly.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think my center, Cura at Ohio State, is actually working with Smart Columbus to measure some of the impacts as part of our reporting to the US DOT. And I don't want to talk about any of those results right now. They're still in process. I will say that I think Smart Columbus did move the discussion along. It did lead to this paradigm shift that Jack's talking about. I also feel that, you know, the expectations may have been high. We all thought that we would be like sailing around in autonomous vehicles by the time this thing was over. I think that was unrealistic even from the beginning. But I think we tried a lot of new technologies and ways of going forward that will have a lasting impact on the city.
Okay. Kevin, any thoughts on that?
Just quickly, I mean, I think that we're seeing Ohio take a leadership role when it comes to some of the technologies and automations that can assist us in the future.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. I think anybody traveling on Route 33 especially will start to see a lot of that experimentation. Okay, I'm always assuming that the audience has better questions than me, so let's turn it over to Jane.
Well, I have a couple questions that were submitted online as people registered, and then I have some here. So we'll try to intermix live questions with some of these folks. So Eric Brown, Columbus City Schools, has a pretty basic question. Why do we seek to enlarge our city, particularly through tax incentives, when we have a good size now? What's desirable about growing bigger when you could apply the same time and resources to improve what we have now? Doesn't growing bigger add more people, companies, traffic, crime, congestion, and more?
It doesn't have to.
Do rock, paper,
It doesn't
scissors.
have to. I mean, we just have to manage the growth well. You know, I mean, in terms of traffic, there are inevitable consequences of being a bigger city. There's no question about that. But I think we can mitigate a lot of these problems just by being a little more thoughtful and mindful and doing some rethinking about how we've approached things in the past. The way we've approached growth up until now is not working for us, at least from a transportation point of view. And I think we can handle this growth in an effective way. So I wouldn't say growth for growth's sake. That's, of course, bad. But there are positive aspects of growth. We can see that in our city. We can see all the things that are happening here and the vibrant culture and the businesses. So I wouldn't necessarily want to push that away.
Sure. Jack?
And with the Department of Transportation, our vision for the future, our interstate system is pretty much complete. We are, addressing pinch points. We are not going to be building thousands of miles of interstate in the Buckeye State. Right. So we have to grow in a smart fashion and get more utility out of the infrastructure that's already there. Dr. Miller talked about, creative reuse of adaptive reuse of our existing facilities. I think the smart lane at I-670, we didn't build another lane, we just used the shoulder. Right. These are kind of things that you can do so to accommodate growth. Growth will come because Ohio, I think, as Kevin has pointed out, is going to become attractive to people who are on the coast and in the Sun Belt.
I think Dr. Miller's spot on. It's not growth for growth's sake. It's how can we grow smartly and improve the quality of life for Ohioans that are already here as well as those that are coming without putting those sorts of constraints that were mentioned by the gentleman asking the question onto the system, right? And a smart look at that growth and a smart use of infrastructure investments, I think, will help us grow in a manner that makes it better for everyone.
Right. Go ahead.
Hi, Carol McGuire. We all recently had a ringside seat to a ship the size of the Empire State Building blocking the Suez Canal that I hear may have resulted in at least $1 billion, if not more, of cost within the supply chain logistics end of things. And we saw ships stacked up all over the place, some of whom bit the bullet and decided they were going to go around the Cape. And so that added a lot of costs. I'm recalling being warned that we all, as individuals, could again experience the escalating cost of toilet paper. So I guess my question is, how do we address, this is a choke point. I mean, there aren't that many ways in which some of these kinds of things can be accommodated. And internationally, is there thinking going on with regard to how we deal with not only Suez Canal, Panama Canal, and other areas like that that literally will impact our own environment?
I think Kevin probably go right up your wheelhouse there.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. That's a great question, and we're seeing these issues hit home, right? Even before the Suez Canal incident, as soon as and even prior to the pandemic, we had a strained supply chain when it came to the movement of goods via shipping containers. And there was a much greater influx of goods via shipping containers than there was out of the U.S. When the pandemic started, we saw things get locked down in the Far East. And so things stopped, containers stopped moving. So what we saw as far as ships backed up sitting in the ocean outside the Suez Canal had already been happening outside of our major ports. And when the director of Ohio Department of Transportation talks about the importance of the Heartland Corridor, and we talk about foreign trade zones, what we're seeing is the ability of Ohio businesses to bypass some of the congestion of those major ports by coming to, say, Norfolk or Savannah, and bringing those goods directly to Ohio, and then taking care of some of the the customs and the intermodal needs that they have. Now, there will always be, at least for the next decade or so, a strain when it comes to the amount of shipping containers that are available and the balance of their movement, as well as a shortage of the chassis that those shipping containers need to go onto for truck movement over the road. So the Suez Canal, I think, highlighted internationally the extent of this strain. It's been there for a while. The ripples will continue for years. But it certainly gives us something to think about from an infrastructure and transportation perspective.
Jack, do you have a thought?
Yes, you asked how would we like to see some of that American Jobs Plan money spent. One of the hot words in transportation these days is resiliency.
Okay.
Resiliency gives you optimal, multiple options on how you respond. If the split shut down here in Central Ohio, we would be in a bad way. So we're looking at resiliency being part of that contingency planning that you do to make sure that infrastructure is resilient enough to withstand shocks, like what happened with that big boat stuck in the Suez Canal. So those are the things that we're thinking about.
Okay.
That's an excellent comment. I want to just follow up on that. The fact that one ship could disrupt our global supply chain shows you that we do not have a resilient global supply
Yeah.
chain. What we've done is we've maximized the efficiency of our global supply chain to support just-in-time production. And efficiency and resilience are not friends. They're not enemies either. They're more like frenemies.
Okay.
Efficiency can help with resilience, but when we try to optimize efficiency, we lose resilience. It's not only true of our global supply chain, it's also true of our passenger transportation systems at a regional and state level, or city level, excuse me. So like in Columbus, we've maximized one thing, the automobile, but we have a very efficient and convenient system in some ways, but it's a system that's easily disrupted by shocks.
Right.
And this is part of the paradigm shift that Jack's talking about. We have to start thinking about resilience as much as efficiency. And I would also add sustainability.
Okay, sure. Jane?
So I'm going to consolidate several questions.
Okay.
We've talked about light rail and/or modern streetcars in this city for as long as I can remember. I've got a couple questions about a commuter route along State Route 315, got lots of questions about the 3C Amtrak likelihood, and we've also discussed the fact that more millennials are coming here, and millennials are shying away from cars. They want something like light rail or modern streetcars. Is that a trend of the past, or is that a trend we're still going to see here in Central Ohio?
Do you mean streetcars specifically, or just?
Any kind of mass transit that would be fixed like a modern streetcar or
Like anything
potentially light rail?
Probably anything beyond a bus, right?
Yeah, I think if it looks like a bus, it sounds like a bus, it probably is a bus.
Well, yeah. If you really want to cry sometime, look at a streetcar map of Columbus in 1910, and you could see where we had streetcars throughout the whole entire, central part of the city, and we threw it away, unfortunately. We wish we still had that. What do we do at this point? Again, rail is from an energy point of view and efficiency point of view, is a great way to go, but it takes a long time. I'm personally a big fan of bus rapid transit, and that's something that's gaining traction here in Central Ohio. And the reason is that if you do bus rapid transit correctly, I mean, if you have like dedicated lanes where they're not sitting in traffic, if you pay before you board, and if you have nice stations, it can be a lot like light rail. In fact, it can achieve throughput that starts to approach light rail, and it can be a very comfortable, positive experience for people. I think the reason why a lot of people are resistant to mass transit is that they haven't experienced really first-rate public transit. We've had several generations grow up in the United States with the view that public transit's only for people who can't drive, and that's another paradigm shift that we have to reach.
I hear you. Jack?
And there's a cultural issue too, in the sense that people, older generations think that, that's, transit is for poor people or people who don't have cars. Let's just be plain. But I agree that bus rapid transit has potential in terms of a transitional kind of mode for us. We support bus rapid transit and with the Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority. ODOT worked with the city of Cleveland to establish these bus rapid transit lanes. You probably know about them. So it is useful. The stops are nice. In regards to Amtrak, the question that was asked, we have been in conversations with people at Amtrak. They are very serious about establishing a 3C corridor, as well as stops in the Hamilton, Miami University area, and perhaps Dayton. And there's one north of here that I can't recall. But that is going to be 15 to 20 years out, in terms of having it, really, it's not 10 years if they really put a lot of money into it. But that creates a question for not just Central Ohio, but statewide leadership. Is statewide leadership prepared to support the system, because the way Amtrak operates, once they establish it and prove it works for 4 or 5 years, they hand it off to the state in terms of O&M, operations and maintenance. So that's a question looming ahead for Ohio.
I mean, I'm personally not encouraged that our state officials will support that, but we'll see. Kevin, anything? Okay. Go ahead, Carol.
I'm Carol Looper, and I know the three of you are all involved in ground transportation. Yes. But is air transportation of cargo and people more than just a blip on getting things from place to place?
No, it's not a blip. We expect air transportation in the next 9 years to increase from 800,000 tons a year to 1.3 million tons a year. And it's going to have the same type of growth that we see with rail, not quite as much as we see with over-the-road trucking, but it will increase. And so earlier I mentioned intermodal facilities, of which the Columbus region has 4, and those are very vital to that movement via air, whether it be transloading onto vehicles or through the use of shipping containers. It's another reason why this is a great hub for industry and manufacturing and distribution.
If I may add, the Ohio Department of Transportation with Drive Ohio and Fly Ohio, we're actually experimenting and working on drone delivery for special projects, for special packages. And we're working with NASA in regards to piloting, this next generation of drone delivery. Is called Advanced Urban Air Mobility. Okay. And it's promising. It's promising. And we have partners whom I won't name here. We have partners who are involved working on this as another sort of like cottage aspect of air freight in regards to commercial passenger air travel. We need Joe Nardoni here. Well, I can't speak to that.
Okay.
I'll just add something about aviation. The big problem with aviation is that it's so energy intensive, and there's no way around that. What you're buying is you're buying speed for a lot of energy and a large amount of carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. It's not saying we shouldn't fly or we shouldn't, but we just need to use it more carefully. And urban air transportation for passengers bothers me. I don't think that's a good idea. Again, too much energy. It'll be too costly. It's going to be transportation for the 1%, and we're going to be spreading congestion to our skies. Do we really want that? I think it'd be better to take any money we're putting into urban air transportation and put it into public transit.
Okay.
I don't see what we're buying other than faster movement for the 1% with urban air transportation.
Okay.
Hi, Mark Conti. The City of Columbus recently adopted the Vision Zero plan that seeks to reduce deaths by transportation to zero. Can you guys touch on that with regard to how that will impact active transportation and all other forms of transportation aside from the automobile?
I can, yeah, and I'm sure Jack can as well. But yes, I think this is another thing that I think is very positive here in Central Ohio and Columbus, the fact that they've joined the Vision Zero network and they're adopting Vision Zero policies. For those of you who don't know, Vision Zero came out of Sweden, and it's the idea that we can move our communities to zero traffic fatalities with design and legal changes. And I think it's so necessary. Pedestrian and cyclist deaths have been increasing over the last 10 years. They've gone up 50% over the last 10 years nationally, even though deaths for people in vehicles have remained flat in terms of vehicle miles traveled. So we're seeing an increase in the injuries and deaths to vulnerable populations. And the people of color, poor people who live in less affluent communities, and older people are disproportionately being killed by automobiles. And I think we need to, this is another hard decisions that have to be made. We're going to have to slow things down in our streets. A lot of drivers don't want to hear that, but that's the major cause of fatalities and deaths are speeding. We did a study when the pandemic first hit last year. We did a study in Cura where we looked at traffic data, and we noticed that speeding was up during the pandemic. And we published a paper on that back in June, got a little bit of attention. Unfortunately, the statistics have have supported us, because now at the end of 2020, we've seen that traffic has dropped, but fatalities are up in the United States. What did we learn from that? We learned that our streets are designed for speed, not safety. And when traffic goes away, people drive recklessly. The main thing that was keeping more deaths from occurring on our highways and roads was traffic. That means that our road design needs to be redone. Basically, all of our performance measures and design guidelines for streets and roads maximize speed at the expense of everything else. And that's another paradigm shift that we need to go through.
I agree entirely. As he points out, our roads have what quote-unquote design speed, which is almost always higher. It is always higher than the actual posted speed. But we are also subscribed to Vision Zero. We call it Towards Zero Deaths at the Ohio Department of Transportation. We are now the fourth highest investor in safety projects in the nation, only behind Florida, California, and Texas, because we take it very seriously. 266 safety projects, $178 million, most of them pedestrian-oriented and intersection-oriented for this year upcoming.
But again, you're almost talking about, like, you're talking about just straight up traffic deaths, and you're more referring to pedestrians, right, and bicyclists?
I'm
Or we?
talking about all of it.
We're talking about everything, okay.
And
Is the
I don't
whole
want to
thing.
discount traffic deaths. We still have 4,000 people dying every year in the United States and 2 million seriously injured
Yeah.
every year in the United States from automobiles. It's the equivalent of a commercial airliner crashing every other day. If that was happening in our aviation system, we'd be freaking out, but for some reason on our roads, we say, well, we shouldn't treat it like it's inevitable, like it's the weather. We can actually, the vast majority of crashes, and by the way, we don't use the word accident, we like the word crash, because the vast majority of these crashes are preventable.
Okay.
It can be prevented by design changes, by education, and by legal changes, how we set speed limits, for example.
Right. Go ahead.
Okay, quickly, I know we're running out of
yeah.
time. My name is Peter McCrae. I have my own virtual architectural practice nationally out of Worthington. I'd like to go back to public transportation real quick. 20 years ago, I was attending monthly bacon, eggs, and rail meetings in the North Market, okay? We obviously missed the boat on commuter rail travel, unlike Charlotte, North Carolina, for example, where I used to live. What do you think about a future that takes care of the first mile and addresses the last mile and leverages the proven popularity of ride-hailing, where individuals at their homes would request a vehicle, a small commuter vehicle, electric. They would come together at designated times. They would link together and bring people to the urban area to take care of morning and evening rush hour. Then they would break apart, drop each individual off for the last mile. Then they would continue to be used the rest of the day for normal ride hailing out to the airport, et cetera, or they would go to the place where they wait to be hailed again. What do you think of future? It sounds like Minority Report. What do you think of a future? But it seems achievable today because of the immediate push to electric vehicles. That's going crazy. Plus the proven viability of ride hailing, and people might not want to own cars to commute with anymore. So that's my question.
Okay. Real quick.
That sounds fantastic, but I think we can get most of the way there just by existing and proven technologies that exist right now. Build up public transit, fix our sidewalks so people can walk to public transit stops, and improve bikeability, improve bike infrastructure so people can access public transit, and also support ride-hailing and micromobility. I think we can get most of what you're describing just by sticking with proven technologies and enhancing them with some of the things you're talking about.
Excellent. I hope you enjoyed today's forum. I know I enjoyed having live audience back in the room, and we always enjoy our live people who watch on the live stream. Next week, we are pleased to welcome former U.S. District Attorney Dave DeVillers with host Colleen Marshall, another CMC board member, and his firsthand experience investigating domestic terror, gangs, and political corruption in our midst. Thanks to the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation for presenting our live stream in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch and PNC. Thanks again to our online virtual seat patrons and those of you who came today. And special appreciation to our speakers. We could not do this without you, Jack Marchbanks, Harvey Miller, Kevin Chambers, and Doug Buchanan. We hope you'll tune in again next week and maybe even show up here. Until then, be well and stay safe. Great job, Doug.